It's people, it's not a problem, right? And I tend to hear people talk about the homeless problem.
Let's find a cleaner channel.
We've reached the point that no matter where you live, homelessness impacts us all. Here in Long Beach, we've seen a 62% increase in the homeless population since 2020. That's a hard number to process considering Long Beach has received $85 million over the last 2 years in state and federal funding to address the homelessness issue. It might be fair to say that people who aren't working directly with our homeless population day in and day out are not ready to take on the challenge of truly understanding some of the issues that lead to homelessness and making sure the resources to get out of that situation are easily accessible. Maybe those who have made it their life's mission to help people turn their lives around should help our city leaders come with a plan that can actually work. On today's show, I sit down with Chaplin and Executive Director of the Long Beach Rescue Mission, Jeff Levine, to talk about how we can impact the homeless population now and how we can impact the future so maybe one day his services are no longer needed. That's happening right now on this week's The Word.
Watch this. This.
You are now listening to The Word with Jackie Ray.
Thank you so much for joining me on this series that we're doing for homelessness. Obviously, I think people know about the Long Beach Rescue Mission, but one of the things we're finding in this series is people don't know as much as they think they know.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you taking the time. But before we got started, you were talking about a little bit the road that people find themselves on that lead to homelessness.
Well, I was sharing, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want to be homeless when I grow up. I want to live under a bridge and, sleep on the street. And I think one of the things that we tend to forget during the conversation about homelessness is that it's not just about housing. It's not just about employment, that we also need to address one of the main contributing factors, which is childhood trauma. And so there was a study, it was done by a Kaiser hospital. It was called the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And they did a weight loss program for people who were morbidly obese. They helped them lose hundreds of pounds. They followed up with them a year later, and half of them had regained all the weight that they had lost. So they were trying to figure out what was the contributing factors to those who regained the weight. And what they discovered was that the more adverse childhood experiences that a person had, the more likely they were to develop diabetes, heart disease, suicide, and homelessness. And so the one example that they gave was there was a woman who, had lost a lot of weight, and she was in the grocery store, and a man came up and commented on how good she looked. And it triggered the sexual abuse that she had experienced. And she left the hospital, or left the grocery store, and just began eating. And, it was kind of that safety, that protection. So they developed a test, and it's 10 questions. And for every question you answer yes to, it exponentially increases the likelihood of those conditions that I had talked about. And so these questions range from, were your parents divorced? Did you live with a family member who suffered from mental illness? Were you ever the victim of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse? And so the average score of a person experiencing homelessness is 6 out of 10. Mm-hmm. So when you think, and I mean, one childhood trauma could be significant enough to throw your whole life out of control. To have experienced multiple childhood traumas, I don't think that, in my experience, so I've been working with people experiencing homelessness for 16 years, that to just give somebody a job is going to fix all of the things that are around it. And certainly some of the clients that we serve are work ready. They've lost their job, they've lost their home, they come in, you put together your resume, you begin searching for employment, and great, that's a great pathway. But for many of the people, and they're struggling with substance abuse or alcoholism, there's an underlying contributing factor for why they're choosing that. Mm-hmm. And I think in understanding that, it gives me an incredible amount of compassion, empathy, that when I see somebody sleeping on the street, or I see somebody walking around screaming at something that's not there, that was an infant at one point. That was a child. And, the backstory on that, we had a young man who came through our program, and he was born with heroin in his system.
Oh, wow.
By the time he was 6 months old, he had been to 4 different foster care homes. And so, and not saying anything bad about the foster care homes, but that attachment that comes during those first, months of life. So it's not surprising he ends up a heroin addict himself. And he came to the rescue mission, and literally had a walker. He's like in his mid 30s, and they found him on the side of a freeway. Body was just broken up. So he gets there, does the 1 year program, graduates, relapses, does another 2 years clean. I officiate his wedding. He ends up meeting a girl at my church, and they go off and do their premarital counseling, come back. I officiate his wedding, and 6 months later, I officiated his funeral. He had relapsed and overdosed. And so it's a long game. It's people. It's not a problem, right? And I tend to hear people talk about the homeless problem.
Right.
It's people, and they're made in the image of God. Even though that image is marred, we live in a very broken and fallen world, but they're deserving of dignity, and they have intrinsic value, independent of the choices that they've made, independent of the circumstances that they find themselves in. And I think that's, a complex perspective on what's going on when we're talking about homelessness.
I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. That's the term that I've always heard, the homeless problem. And one of my colleagues at the Long Beach Post recently did a story about a group of people in the downtown area who had started a petition to try to get the Christian Outreach Association moved.
Yeah.
So then so many homeless people wouldn't be downtown
Yeah.
because they don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So I guess I think that kind of hurts my feelings, because when I see it, I always think, dang, I don't have enough to do enough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand you wanting to go home at night and feel safe and things of that nature. I don't know, can you feel that way and still understand that these are the people that are at their lowest point, so maybe let's not kick them while they're down, kind of thing. Can there be a happy median in those two feelings?
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on is that idea of not in my backyard.
Yes.
Right? I want to help the problem, just don't bring it anywhere near me.
Right.
And, I think that we can have understanding for both sides of that, for those that are in need of care, but also for those that want to live in a safe environment. And certainly where there are homeless services, people who are experiencing homelessness are going to come, and they bring the challenges that they experience with them, and are there increased crime rates? Sure. Is there open drug use? Sure. And so I think trying to find a pathway where, if you centralize services in one place, that's going to create a network of conversation among people experiencing homelessness. This is the place to go. Long Beach Multi-Service Center is a great example of kind of a one-stop shop for people experiencing homelessness. It's also in an industrial area,
right?
So it's kind of off the map and not always as easy to get to. For those people experiencing homelessness, we have seen an increase just around the Long Beach Rescue Mission. I mean, we got such a unique location where we're 50 yards from a middle school,
right?
That's unheard of. And so we do our part. We engage people, do outreach around our area, and we want them to understand that yes, we're here to offer services, but we also want to be a good neighbor to those who are in our community. And I think that's a conversation that can be had in those areas is, if you're going to come and receive services here, we want to know that you're going to care for our neighbors just as much as we do. And so, one of the, and this is maybe, I don't know, it's what it is. So when I started working here, there was a young man that was in the courtyard, and I walked up to him, and good-looking young guy, totally could have gone out and got work. And I had walked up to him, and I was like, hey, man, how you doing? And like, what's the plan? And, are you searching for work? Like, how can I support you? And he's like, he gave me he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, work? Why do I need to get a job? If I go to the park, they bring me food. If I wait around long enough, they bring me a jacket. Why do I need to go to work? And it hit me that the provision of resources without accountability creates dependency. And so we can, in our good intentions, keep somebody experiencing homelessness for an incredibly long time. And so there's another balance. How do we demonstrate compassionate care while also providing accountability that says, I want to show you mercy, I want to meet your need, but I also want to help you progress.
Right.
And so with the Long Beach Rescue Mission, we've created a system of accountability. So we have two programs. We've got our 90-day case management program, and that's a client-driven accountability program. So they come in, they meet with a case manager, we assess the situation that they're in, and we develop an action plan. And so it could be something as, Entry is vital documents, getting an ID, getting a social security card, securing a housing voucher, putting your resume together, securing employment. And as long as they're meeting their action plan, we'll continue to work with them. And we're grace oriented, right?
Right.
We'll give you a reasonable amount of time and you come back and you got a good story, we'll work with you.
Right.
But if you're showing us that you're not serious about progressing and taking steps towards life change, we're going to invite you to take a break from our services for a while until you're ready to come back and begin to do that work. And then we have a 1-year discipleship life recovery program, and we're a Christian faith-based organization. So we're trying to answer the question, how does being in a relationship with Jesus affect every aspect of what it means to be human? So how I think about myself, how I relate to other people, how I relate to God. But then it also, the curriculum addresses what are those underlying factors. So it could be anger management. It could be, workforce development, developing soft skills, life skills, critical thinking, problem solving, things that, we kind of take for granted if we've grown up in a home that, and it's like and we deal with the adverse childhood experiences. One of the most interesting things. So we give the program participants the test. They sit down and they answer those 10 questions. And it's not uncommon for them to lie.
Of course, you're right.
About because
it's embarrassing sometimes, right?
Embarrassing, but also you're having to take ownership of the fact that those things happen to you.
Right.
And I think as they get further in the program, there's a greater sense of vulnerability and an openness to saying, yeah, these things they hurt and they did impact my life and they impacted the choices that I've made. And then how does the Bible bring healing and hope to that? Because those experiences don't define us. We respond to them, certainly, but I'm not the trauma that occurred to me. Right. And beginning to develop a sense of identity that is rooted in the image of God, of that intrinsic value, that dignity that comes from knowing that I'm made in the image of my Creator, I think is just powerful to bringing that healing and to really casting a vision for what the future can be. That I don't have to allow the traumas that I've experienced to continue to forge the trajectory of my future.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that, as I've been going around and working more and more with the unhoused population, I've met a lot of people and I've asked them, why don't you just reach out? Why don't you ask for help? Why don't you go here? Why don't you go there? And one of the things that Ronnie told me, Ronnie's on trajectory to do great things. And he wants to give back and stay in kind of the helping the unhoused field, which is great. Yeah. But one of the things that he said to me that stood out was there's always conditions with whatever services you receive. He's like, so if, for example, he said, what if I'm not a Christian? And then they tell me I have to become a Christian to get help. Or, okay, yeah, you don't do drugs, which he says, I think that's a given, but what if I'm a smoker now? Yeah. And they tell me I can't smoke. He's like, there's always conditions that come along with help. Now, with your Christian base, obviously, is that a condition for them to receive help?
So this is where I think there's a real misperception, right? That in order to receive services at Long Beach Rescue Mission, you have to be a Christian or you have to study the Bible or you have to pray. We are a mercy ministry. Come as you are. We're going to feed you. We're going to clothe you. We're going to give you a place to stay. No strings attached. Now, we are Christians, and so what motivates our ministry is our love for Jesus. And his commandment was, love one another just as I have loved you.
Right.
Well, he didn't wait for me to have it all together before he set his affection on me.
Right.
He loved me just as I came out of a background of addiction. I spent 12 years of my life on meth. And in December of 2003, I got down on my knees and I asked Jesus to change my life. And I'm not perfect, but I'm not the same person I was. And the only account that I could give for that is that when I called on Jesus' name, he changed, my life changed. And so that gives me great hope for the people that come through. But, rescue missions, gospel rescue missions, historically, and I'll own our history, right? I'll own our history. So historically, before you would get fed, you would have to sit and listen to a gospel presentation.
Right.
And I was a pastor for the last 4 years. I think the longest sermon I gave was 70 minutes.
Wow.
Felt like 20 while I was up there. But you ask anybody in the congregation, I was long-winded. And so you get some long-winded preacher up there and you're hungry.
I was raised Baptist,
Yep.
so,
So you-
I know
you
about
get it.
long-winded.
Yeah, you get it. So, when I started here, I was like, man, that doesn't ring of the compassion.
Right.
If you're hungry and you want to eat and somebody's going long and it just was, so we flipped it. We said, look, come in. We're going to pray for the meal. We're going to ask a blessing over the meal. All right. Hopefully that isn't too painful, but, come and eat. And then we're going to have a service at 7:00. And if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to join us. Some guys sit out in the courtyard. Most everybody comes in.
Right.
And the messages are words of encouragement, right? That we're not beating people over the head with the Bible. And I don't think that's God's heart. And I don't think that that's the message, if we read his word honestly, that he teaches. He loves us. And he died for us and shows us that. And he was raised, and we have hope in that. So, I would love to clear up that misperception
Right.
where it's like, you don't have to jump through hoops to come and receive services here. We're a compassion-based ministry, and we love people. And so my hope is that your experience at the Long Beach Rescue Mission would be one of compassionate care, but that you would also experience God through the love that you receive from our staff and from our program participants.
What's the year-long program? What are the steps in that?
Yeah, so often we'll have somebody who comes into the 90-day program where they're like, yeah, this is maybe a little bit more complicated than I was thinking it would be. And so they can come into that year program. And the year program, we do one set of, teachings at a time. So we'll do, eight sessions on prayer, or we'll do, 16 sessions on adverse childhood experiences, or 12 sessions on financial literacy. And as they go through each of those, they get to different stages within the program. And then the idea is a disassociation, reassociation model. During the first part of the program, we're disassociating you from outside. So we don't want you connecting with your old friends, and we don't want you leaving and just going and running amok. We want you to be rooted. We want you to get into the rhythm of the program. By 6 months, we want you attending church outside. And the purpose for that is we need community. We need accountability. They're going to get that there at the rescue mission, but at some point they're going to leave the rescue mission. And so where is that source of care and community and accountability? And so they start attending church outside. And then if they've run a solid program, 10 months, we're helping them look for employment, so that by the time they hit that 1 year mark, they're saving their income. They're working on identifying a new place to stay. And what is incredible, 87% of our graduates who transition into permanent housing are still stably housed a year later.
That's an amazing statistic.
It's huge. It's huge. And so what that says is this program works if you work it.
Right.
Right? If you come in and you're serious. And not everybody who comes through the program is a Christian. It's not a requirement. Are they going to learn about the Bible? Sure. Are they going to be instructed, by our chaplains? Yeah. But for many of them, even if they don't cross that line to place their trust in Jesus or to express faith in him, they'll say that it was a really positive, encouraging experience and that they felt really cared for.
Right.
So, yeah.
When they graduate, if they experience hardship once they've found that permanent housing, can they reach back? I'm sure they can. What are the pathways for that?
Yeah. So what I love is for many, this is like the healthiest relationships that they've had in their life.
Right.
And they know that they're loved. And so they know that if something goes wrong, they can always come back. And so we do what we call like a fast track. So we get them in and let's just, 90 days, come do program for 90 days, hit reset. And, halfway through that, let's start talking and figuring out how we're going to get you back out, back on your feet. They always say that relapse is a part of recovery. There were so many times throughout my addiction that I tried to get sober and where I fell back. And, that cycle, I finally got to a point where I realized I wanted a relationship with God more than I wanted to get high, but I didn't know how to stop. And that was a very broken place to sit. You just felt very torn. There's something that you long for with all of your heart, but you don't know how to get there.
Right.
And it wasn't this magic formula. It was just being honest with God on the floor in my room on my knees. Like, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. And he met me there. So, I think that as our graduates relapse, we want to be a safety net to them, so that they don't fall and hit the ground and not come back. If it happens, come back and let us help you. Everything that I've experienced to this point, I really believe has equipped me for this role of leadership. And I think, that opportunity to lead in the area of homeless services is an incredible opportunity for our city. We need that. And we need an informed understanding. I think, part of that is awareness among the community that, it's not just jobs, it's not just affordable housing, and we need to address a complex issue with complex solutions.
Right.
And again, I'm uncomfortable with the solutions language, but for lack of a better way of framing it, there's no silver bullet, right? It's not like you can discover a medicine and it's going to make it all go away.
Right.
It's having those wraparound services and having that continuum of care and having a community that believes that people can change. I think that presents a pathway. And I think if we can remember that we're playing a long game, and it's bad now. I'm gonna forecast 10, 15 years from now, the impact and effects of COVID on the generation that had to navigate that. Well, you go back to the, childhood trauma.
Right.
So the schools are closed, and everybody was trying to do what they thought was best. Byproduct. You had children who were victims of abuse now in their homes with their abuser, who's also experiencing the same pressures and the same challenges of COVID, which often leads to greater abuse. And there's no interaction with teachers or administrators or counselors to help identify those kids who are experiencing trauma. 10, 15 years from now, right? Substance abuse, alcoholism, homelessness.
That's a scary thought, but
They
probably learn to shut themselves off too.
Yeah. And I think, if we're going to talk about homelessness, when people get to us, it's kind of the end of the pathway, right?
Right.
We need to start thinking about homeless prevention. We need to go upstream and really begin to address, and again, this isn't a very popular position, but how are we helping families love one another, serve one another, bring health to one another? You've got now generations of people who have experienced trauma who are now perpetuating that cycle. And until we get in and provide tools and provide opportunities and create vision for how that can be different, how that cycle can be broken, this is going to continue to be a reality that we live with. So Long Beach Rescue Mission historically had a youth center.
Right.
Most people don't know that. And so a vision that God has given me is to create a community center that has after school programming for our middle school students, because we're right next to the middle school, and that we would do, after school tutoring, games and activities, Bible club. All of these children are on subsidized lunches. 45% of the people that live in this zip code live below the poverty level. For some, that is the only meal that they eat during the day. And so if we have this community center and we can provide a hot meal at the end of the program, they've got a safe place to stay. You're talking gang diversion, homeless prevention, shuttle them home, and really invest in the lives of our next generation, our next leaders, creating that social context, community, accountability. I think those are all ways that we can really make a difference.
Yeah, I gotta say, I've not thought about homelessness that way as far as prevention. I've definitely thought about it as something we need to attack now. But you're absolutely right. When you, unfortunately, I have a nephew who's experienced homelessness, and because it wasn't as popular then, but we weren't able to properly diagnose him with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
By the time we, identified it, he's 20 years old. And so now it's like, he doesn't want to listen to anybody. He doesn't want to stay medicated. And then of course my brother and his mom divorced, and that was a crazy relationship. And so he's never processed all that. And just to hear you say that, it kind of clicked with me. If we could have gotten in there, if somebody could have helped us, because sometimes I think family, You know, like my dad says, you can't see the forest from the trees sometimes. So sometimes you just can't really identify there's a problem because you're in the middle of the problem, you know? So if there had been an outside source that could have come to us with love, right? And said, hey, this is a problem that's going to manifest itself 10 years down the line. You know, I think telling those kinds of stories for people who can go back and say this is where it started, those stories need to be heard. And I think that idea of saying, hey, these aren't unique. We need to address that now.
50 years of ministry in this city, 50 years of helping men and women and children, their lives being transformed. We will be here until Jesus comes back, right? But man, if we can go up, I'd love to work myself out of a job. I really would.
Thank you so much to Executive Director and Chaplain for the Long Beach Rescue Mission, Jeff Levine, for joining me today. Now remember, if you or someone you know needs assistance, you don't have to be religious, nor do you have to become religious. You can reach the Long Beach Rescue Mission at 562-591-1292. Again, that number is 562-591-1292. If you want to donate, you can visit the Long Beach Rescue Mission online at lbrm.org. Now is the perfect time to give, as the Long Beach Rescue Mission is planning on donating 18,000 meals to people in need this holiday season. Here at the Long Beach Post, we are going to continue to take a deeper dive into our homeless situation in Long Beach. You can follow us on that journey by visiting lbpost.com/investigations. Don't forget to subscribe. Once again, I'm Jackie Ray. Thanks for listening. And remember, if you have to speak a word, make it a good one.
Watch this. This.